The Dark Triad isn't some internet buzzword. It's a psychological framework identified by researchers Paulhus and Williams in 2002, describing three overlapping but distinct personality constructs that share a common core of callousness and self-interest. First, narcissism. This is the grandiose self-image, the unshakable belief in one's own exceptionalism. Narcissists don't just think they're good. They believe they're destined for greatness. They require admiration like oxygen and will manipulate entire rooms to get it. But here's what they don't tell you in psychology textbooks: that unwavering self-belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When everyone else is paralyzed by imposter syndrome, the narcissist is already selling themselves as the expert, raising capital, building empires on the foundation of their own mythology. Think about Steve Jobs. The man convinced himself he could bend reality to his will. And then he did. He wasn't the best engineer at Apple. He wasn't the best designer. But he believed, with religious fervor, that he was the only one who could create the future. And that belief infected everyone around him. That's narcissism as a wealth-building tool. Second, Machiavellianism. Named after Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince, this trait is pure strategic manipulation. Machiavellians see every interaction as a chess game. They're emotionally detached, calculating, focused entirely on outcomes rather than methods. They'll be your best friend today if it serves their interests tomorrow. They'll betray you without a second thought if the math works out. This isn't impulsive cruelty. It's cold pragmatism. John D. Rockefeller embodied this perfectly. He'd attend church on Sunday, donate to charities, smile for photographs. Then on Monday, he'd systematically destroy competitors, buy out desperate rivals at pennies on the dollar, and build a monopoly so powerful the government had to break it apart. Was he evil? That's irrelevant. He was effective. Third, psychopathy. Not the Hollywood serial killer version, but what psychologists call primary psychopathy, or successful psychopathy. This is fearlessness, emotional immunity, and an absence of guilt or anxiety. Psychopaths don't lose sleep over tough decisions. They don't feel the weight of risk the way you do. They can fire 1,000 employees before lunch and genuinely not care about the human cost because they're optimizing for a different variable: winning. Jordan Belfort, before his spectacular crash, embodied this. So did many of the financial engineers who created the 2008 crisis. They could package toxic assets, knowing they'd destroy lives, because that emotional connection simply didn't exist for them. The guilt that would paralyze you doesn't even register. Now here's the critical insight. Most extremely wealthy people don't have clinical levels of all three traits, but they have enough of each to operate outside the emotional and ethical constraints that keep most people poor. They have the narcissist's self-belief, the Machiavellian's strategic ruthlessness, and the psychopath's emotional immunity to consequences. And that combination? That's rocket fuel for wealth accumulation. Let's start with narcissism, because it's the most visible and, ironically, the most socially rewarded of the three traits. Your parents, your teachers, society, they told you to be humble. Stay in your lane. Don't get too big for your britches. And that programming has cost you everything. Because while you're being appropriately modest about your abilities, the narcissist is already 3 steps ahead, convinced they're the smartest person in every room, demanding attention, resources, and opportunities like they're entitled to them. And here's the sick joke: the world usually gives it to them. Rule 1. Irrational self-belief creates reality. Elon Musk started SpaceX with 0 experience in aerospace engineering. The industry laughed at him. Experts said it was impossible. His first 3 rockets exploded. Any rational person would have quit. But narcissists don't operate on rationality. They operate on conviction. Musk believed he could colonize Mars, so he kept going until reality bent to match his delusion. This is the narcissist's superpower. They don't need permission from reality. They don't wait for credentials. They declare themselves experts and then work backward to make it true. You see this everywhere in wealth creation. People with no business experience raising millions in venture capital because they sold the vision with such conviction that investors believed them. That's not fraud. That's narcissism weaponized. Rule 2. Shameless self-promotion is non-negotiable. Warren Buffett cultivated an image as the folksy, humble billionaire from Omaha. But go back and study his early career. He was relentlessly self-promoting, writing letters to shareholders that positioned him as an investing genius, courting media attention, building his reputation brick by brick. The humility came later, after the empire was built. During the building phase, pure narcissistic self-marketing. You've been taught that bragging is unseemly, that quality work speaks for itself. That's beautiful poetry and terrible business advice. Quality work gets ignored every single day, while inferior products backed by narcissistic marketing take over markets. If you're not selling yourself, someone less talented but more narcissistic is eating your lunch. Rule 3. Narcissistic immunity to rejection. Here's where narcissism becomes invaluable. Narcissists don't internalize rejection the way you do. When they get told no, their ego architecture reinterprets it. They're too stupid to see my genius. They'll regret this. I'll prove them wrong. That psychological defense mechanism means they keep pitching, keep selling, keep pushing long after a healthy person would have quit. Think about every startup founder who got rejected by 100 investors before someone said yes. That's not perseverance in the normal sense. That's narcissistic inability to accept that they might be wrong. And in business, that delusion is often exactly what's needed. Rule 4. Surrounding yourself with mirrors. Narcissists don't build diverse teams of people who challenge them. They build teams of people who reflect their brilliance back at them. Yes men, admirers, people who validate their vision. And while this creates toxic culture and often leads to spectacular failures, it also creates speed and unity of purpose. When everyone in the room believes the leader is a genius, decisions get made fast. There's no committee paralysis, no endless debate. The narcissist points, everyone moves. Sometimes they move off a cliff, but sometimes they move to market domination before competitors finish their feasibility studies. The dark side you need to acknowledge. Narcissism destroys relationships. It leaves a trail of burned bridges and betrayed partners. Many narcissistic empire builders die alone, despised by their children, their fortunes divided among people who hated them. But here's the brutal question you need to ask yourself. Would you rather be loved and broke, or wealthy and alone? Because for many of the ultra-wealthy, that was the trade. They chose the empire over the relationships. They chose the legacy over the love. I'm not saying you should make that choice. I'm saying you should acknowledge it's a choice, and you're making it every day, whether you realize it or not. If narcissism is the fuel, Machiavellianism is the steering wheel. This is where wealth building becomes a chess game played with human pieces. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1532 as a manual for power acquisition and maintenance. The core thesis: the ends justify the means. Morality is a luxury for those not playing the game. Appearance matters more than reality, and fortune favors those who manipulate circumstances rather than waiting for opportunity. Every billionaire has read the prince, whether literally or through osmosis, because it's the unspoken playbook of wealth accumulation. Rule 5. People are resources, not relationships. This is the hardest pill to swallow. Machiavellians view human relationships transactionally. Every connection has a purpose. Every friendship is evaluated on ROI. They're charming when it serves them, cold when it doesn't, and they'll discard you the moment you stop being useful. Jeff Bezos exemplifies this perfectly. Amazon's corporate culture is notoriously brutal. High turnover, intense pressure, people used up and spit out. But from a Machiavellian perspective, that's optimal. Why keep employees longer than their peak productivity? Why invest in loyalty when you can just hire the next hungry person? You find this repulsive because you're still operating from a moral framework. The Machiavellian abandoned that framework because it was limiting their wealth accumulation. They made a conscious choice: effectiveness over ethics. Rule 6. Strategic generosity is investment. Here's where people misunderstand Machiavellianism. It's not about being cruel for cruelty's sake. It's about being strategic. Sometimes the strategic move is generosity. Look at Bill Gates. He built Microsoft through ruthless, anti-competitive practices, crushing rivals, and leveraging monopolistic power. Then he became the world's most generous philanthropist. Was that a moral awakening? Maybe. Or maybe it's a Machiavellian recognition that, at a certain wealth level, reputation management through philanthropy is the highest ROI investment available. Carnegie wrote, "The Gospel of Wealth," arguing that the rich have a moral obligation to give back. But study his business practices: strike-breaking, wage suppression, dangerous working conditions. He extracted maximum wealth, then used a fraction to build libraries and buy sainthood. That's not hypocrisy. That's Machiavellian mastery of public perception. Rule 7. Information asymmetry is wealth. Machiavellians are obsessed with knowing things others don't. They cultivate networks not for friendship, but for information flow. They're always listening, always collecting data, always building a more complete picture of the chessboard than their opponents have. This is why insider trading, while illegal, is so prevalent. It's the purest expression of Machiavellian wealth building. Use information others don't have to extract wealth from those operating with incomplete data. The Machiavellian doesn't care about fairness. They care about having better information and using it first. Even legally, this principle dominates. The best investors aren't lucky. They have better information networks. The best entrepreneurs don't have better ideas. They see market gaps faster because they're plugged into information flows others aren't accessing. Rule 8. Calculated betrayal when necessary. Here's where Machiavellianism gets truly dark. The willingness to betray allies when the math demands it. Mark Zuckerberg allegedly betrayed the Winklevoss twins and Eduardo Saverin on his path to building Facebook. Was it unethical? Absolutely. Was it necessary to maintain control and build a trillion-dollar company? From his perspective, yes. The Machiavellian doesn't lose sleep over these decisions because they've already done the calculus. The gain outweighs the relationship. This happens constantly in business. Founders pushed out of their own companies, partners betrayed in acquisitions, employees fired the day before vesting. It's not personal, it's strategy. Rule 9. The appearance of virtue. Machiavelli's most famous insight: it's not important to be virtuous, only to appear virtuous. This is why every billionaire has a carefully crafted public image. The charitable foundation, the inspiring mission statement, the down-to-earth interviews. They're not lying exactly. They're managing perception. Because in the game of wealth, What people believe about you is more valuable than what's actually true about you. Reputation is currency, and Machiavellians spend carefully to maintain the reputation that serves their interests. The psychological cost. Machiavellianism creates profound isolation. When you view everyone as a chess piece, you can't have genuine relationships. You're always performing, always calculating, always alone behind the mask. Many ultra-wealthy Machiavellians end up in therapy, trying to figure out why they feel empty despite winning every game. The answer is usually, you traded human connection for strategic advantage, and no amount of money fills that void. But again, that's the trade, and they made it consciously. Now we reach the most misunderstood and most powerful trait, psychopathy. Not the violent criminal type, but what researchers call successful psychopathy, or corporate psychopathy. These are the people who can make decisions that would paralyze you with guilt or anxiety, and then sleep like babies. They're not evil in the cartoon villain sense. They're simply operating without the emotional circuitry that makes most people hesitate. Rule 10. Emotional immunity is competitive advantage. You know that feeling when you have to have a difficult conversation, firing someone, ending a partnership, demanding payment? That knot in your stomach, the rehearsing in your head, the anxiety. Psychopaths don't have that. They can fire their best friend before lunch and genuinely not feel bad about it because they've compartmentalized the emotional component away from the business decision. This isn't suppression, it's absence. And in business, that absence is a superpower. Mitt Romney and Bain Capital became infamous for this. They'd acquire struggling companies, extract maximum value through layoffs and asset sales, then walk away. The human cost, families destroyed, communities devastated, didn't factor into the decision-making process because the empathy circuit that would make that painful simply wasn't active. Rule 11. Risk tolerance through fearlessness. Most people don't get rich because they're afraid of losing what they have, afraid of what might go wrong, afraid of judgment if they fail. Psychopaths don't have this fear response at the same intensity. This is why psychopaths are overrepresented in high-risk, high-reward fields: finance, entrepreneurship, surgery, law. They can take enormous risks without the emotional cost that risk normally carries. They can bet the company, leverage everything, go all in on a hunch, because the fear that would paralyze you simply doesn't trigger for them. Masayoshi Son, CEO of SoftBank, exemplifies this. He's made multi-billion-dollar bets that seemed insane to observers. Some paid off spectacularly, some failed catastrophically. But he keeps going because he doesn't process risk the way normal people do. The potential downside doesn't create the emotional break that would stop most people from pulling the trigger. Rule 12. Manipulation without guilt. Psychopaths are often described as charming. That's because they've learned to simulate emotional connection without actually feeling it. They've studied what makes people feel understood, valued, connected, and they deploy those techniques strategically. This creates incredibly effective salespeople, negotiators, and leaders. They can make you feel like the most important person in the world during a conversation, get what they need, and then completely forget about you the moment you're no longer useful. And they feel no guilt about this because guilt requires empathy, and the empathy circuit is either weak or absent. Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos demonstrated this perfectly. She convinced investors, board members, and partners with intense eye contact, a carefully modulated voice, an apparent passionate belief in her mission. Was it all calculated manipulation? The evidence suggests yes. Did she feel bad about defrauding people? Her behavior suggests no. Rule 13. Consequences don't deter. Here's what makes psychopathic traits so dangerous in wealth accumulation. Psychopaths don't learn from punishment the way others do. Normal people touch a hot stove, feel pain, and develop an avoidance response. Psychopaths don't develop that same avoidance. This means they'll keep pushing boundaries, keep bending rules, keep operating in gray areas even after being punished, because the punishment doesn't create the emotional learning it creates in others. They'll pay the fine, shrug, and do it again if the math still works out. This is why you see repeat offenders in financial fraud. They're not stupid, they're operating with a different risk-reward calculation. The potential punishment doesn't create sufficient emotional deterrence, so they keep rolling the dice. Rule 14. Shallow relationships, deep networks. Psychopaths don't form deep emotional bonds, but they're excellent at building extensive networks. They collect people like tools, maintaining surface-level relationships with hundreds or thousands of individuals who can be activated when needed. This is actually more efficient than the normal human approach of deep relationships with a few people. When you need something done, having 1,000 shallow contacts you can call on is often more valuable than 10 close friends who might actually say no because they care about you. The ultimate edge, remorselessness in decision-making. Here's the core advantage. When you remove guilt, shame, and anxiety from decision-making, you can optimize purely for outcomes. You can make the mathematically correct decision every time, without emotional interference. Should you shut down the division and lay off 500 people to maximize shareholder value? The psychopath doesn't agonize. They run the numbers and execute. Should you back out of a deal because you found a better opportunity? No guilt about the commitment, just rational pivoting. This is why researchers find corporate psychopaths climbing to leadership positions at rates far exceeding their presence in the general population. They're not better at the job, they're better at doing whatever the job requires without emotional constraints. Here's where it gets truly interesting. The real wealth-building power comes not from any single trait, but from the combination and interaction of all three. The narcissist-Machiavellian combination. Narcissism provides the unshakable vision and self-belief. Machiavellianism provides the strategic ruthlessness to execute that vision without moral constraints. Together, they create founders who believe they're destined to change the world and will crush anyone who gets in their way. Think about Travis Kalanick at Uber. Narcissistic belief that he was revolutionizing transportation, combined with Machiavellian willingness to break local laws, manipulate regulators, and create a toxic internal culture to achieve hypergrowth. That combination built a company worth tens of billions before the board finally removed him. The Machiavellian psychopath combination. Machiavellianism provides the strategy and long-term planning. Psychopathy provides the emotional immunity to execute that strategy without hesitation or guilt. Together, they create operators who can plan complex schemes and execute them without the emotional breakdown that would stop normal people. This is your high-level financial engineers, the people who created subprime mortgage securities. They could see the strategy, bundle bad loans, get rating agencies to mark them AAA, sell them to pension funds, and execute it without the guilt that should have come from knowing they were building a house of cards that would destroy the economy. The narcissist-psychopath combination. Narcissism provides the grandiose vision and need for admiration. Psychopathy provides the fearlessness and emotional immunity to pursue that vision, despite any human cost. Together, they create leaders who inspire followers with grand visions, while being completely willing to sacrifice those same followers to achieve the vision. You see this in cult-like corporate cultures. The charismatic leader painting a vision of changing the world, while simultaneously creating conditions that burn out employees, destroy work-life balance, and extract every ounce of productive capacity with zero regard for well-being. The full Dark Triad. When you combine all three traits, narcissistic self-belief, Machiavellian strategic manipulation, and psychopathic emotional immunity, you get the prototype of the ruthless empire builder. They believe they're exceptional and destined for greatness. They strategically manipulate every situation and relationship to advance their interests. And they execute without guilt, fear, or hesitation. That combination is unstoppable in the pursuit of wealth. The problem, of course, is that it's also often self-destructive. The full Dark Triad tends toward overreach, hubris, and spectacular collapse. The narcissism creates blind spots. The Machiavellianism creates enemies. The psychopathy creates recklessness. And eventually, it catches up. But before it catches up, fortunes get built. Empires rise. Wealth accumulates at rates that seem impossible to those operating within normal emotional and ethical constraints. So what do you do with this information? You're not a psychopath. You probably don't have a personality disorder. You feel guilt, empathy, fear, all the emotions that make you human, but also make wealth accumulation harder. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't need to develop a personality disorder to succeed financially. But you do need to understand that you're competing against people who have these traits or who've learned to simulate them. And if you're playing by completely different rules than they are, you're going to lose. Lesson 1. Calibrate your empathy. You don't need to eliminate empathy, but you need to recognize when empathy is costing you money. When you're afraid to raise prices because you're worried about your customers, that's empathy limiting your wealth. When you can't fire an underperforming employee because you feel bad for them, that's empathy destroying your business. The ultra-wealthy have learned to compartmentalize. They can be empathetic in their personal lives while being ruthlessly pragmatic in business. You need to develop that same compartmentalization. Lesson 2. Build strategic self-belief. You don't need to be a narcissist to benefit from self-belief. You need to develop what psychologists call healthy narcissism, confidence without delusion. You need to believe in your value enough to negotiate aggressively, to pitch boldly, to take up space in rooms where you feel you don't belong. Study how the wealthy present themselves. They don't apologize for their success. They don't downplay their achievements. They state their value matter-of-factly and expect to be compensated accordingly. You need to learn that language. Lesson 3. Think strategically about relationships. You don't need to view everyone as a chess piece, but you do need to be honest about which relationships are mutually beneficial and which ones are draining your resources. The wealthy are very good at ending relationships that don't serve them. They're polite about it, but they're decisive. You need to audit your network. Who's giving value? Who's only taking? Who's holding you back? And then you need to make hard decisions about where you invest your limited time and energy. Lesson 4. Develop calculated risk tolerance. You don't need to be fearless, but you need to stop letting fear make your decisions. Every major wealth-building move involves risk. The wealthy have learned to analyze risk objectively rather than emotionally. You need to start taking calculated risks. Start a business, make that investment, have that difficult conversation. Take the bet when the odds are in your favor. You'll never eliminate fear, but you can learn to act despite it. Lesson 5. Study the game being played. The biggest insight from understanding the Dark Triad is this. There's a game being played, and most people don't even know the rules. The wealthy understand that business is competition, that nice guys often finish last, that moral victories don't pay mortgages. You don't have to become ruthless, but you need to be aware of the ruthlessness around you. You need to recognize manipulation when you see it. You need to protect yourself from people who would use these traits against you. The integration, conscious ruthlessness. Here's my recommendation. Develop what I call conscious ruthlessness. This means you understand the Dark Triad and recognize when others are using these traits. You selectively deploy aspects of these traits when strategically necessary. You can be narcissistically confident in a pitch, Machiavellian in a negotiation, emotionally detached when making a tough decision. But you remain conscious of what you're doing and why. You make intentional choices rather than operating from personality disorder. You build wealth without losing your soul. But you also stop pretending that wealth building is some pure, noble endeavor. It's competitive, it's often ugly, and success requires getting comfortable with discomfort. The Dark Triad of wealth is real. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy are overrepresented among the ultra-wealthy, not because being wealthy makes you develop these traits, but because having these traits makes wealth accumulation significantly easier. These traits remove the emotional and ethical barriers that stop most people from doing what's necessary to build fortunes. They enable decisions that would paralyze normal people. They create competitive advantages in a system that rewards ruthlessness over kindness. But here's what the research also shows. These same traits lead to relationship destruction, legal problems, health issues from chronic stress, and often spectacular downfalls. The very traits that build empires can destroy them. Many Dark Triad billionaires end up alone, paranoid, and miserable despite their wealth. So the question isn't whether you should become a narcissistic, Machiavellian psychopath. The question is, how much of your humanity are you willing to trade for wealth? Where's your line? Because make no mistake, there is a trade. You can be maximally ethical and probably remain middle class. You can be moderately strategic and probably become comfortable. Or you can be ruthlessly optimized for wealth accumulation and possibly become very rich while sacrificing relationships, peace of mind, and maybe your soul. Most of the ultra-wealthy made that trade consciously. They looked at the price and decided the empire was worth it. They're not confused about what they gave up. They just decided the alternative was worse. What I want you to understand is that you're making that same choice every day, whether you realize it or not. Every time you choose to be nice instead of effective, to be honest instead of strategic, to prioritize relationships over results, you're making a choice. And that choice has financial consequences. I'm not telling you what choice to make. I'm telling you to make it consciously. Look at the game being played. Understand the actual rules, not the fairy tale version you were taught. And then decide, how do you want to play? The Dark Triad will continue building fortunes because these traits align perfectly with how wealth accumulation actually works. You can be disgusted by that fact. You can rail against it. Or you can understand it, adapt strategically, and use that knowledge to build your own fortune on your own terms. The empire builders aren't coming to save you. The system isn't going to suddenly reward kindness over ruthlessness. This is the game. These are the players, and now you know what they know. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. If this video made you uncomfortable, good. That means you're actually thinking about it instead of just consuming comfortable lies. Hit subscribe if you want more unfiltered truth about how wealth actually works. Drop a comment telling me where your line is. How far would you go for financial freedom? And remember, the money doesn't care about your morals, but you should care about what you become while chasing it. I'll see you in the next one.